You are standing in line for coffee, staring at the menu like this is a serious financial negotiation. The drink you want costs a little more than the one you plan to buy, but the difference is only $3 and not $300, not a car payment, not rent, $3. The kind of money that feels too small to respect and too easy to lose. You tap your card, take the drink, and by the time you get back to your car, the decision has already disappeared. That is the strange power of $3. It almost never feels like spending. It feels like a rounding error with foam on top. It becomes a snack at the gas station, a delivery fee, a small upgrade, a convenience charge, an app you forgot about, a little treat after a day that personally offended you. Nobody ruins their life with $3 once. The danger is that 3 is very good at coming back tomorrow, wearing a different outfit. In one version of your life, you keep doing what you have always done. You spend it not wildly, not irresponsibly in a dramatic movie way, just normally. In the other version, you do something that feels almost embarrassing at first. You separate $3 a day, maybe you invest it, maybe you save it first and move it later. Either way, the point is simple. The money stops disappearing and starts reporting for duty. The first day, nothing happens. This is important because your brain expected at least a tiny parade. You set aside $3 and the world does not change. Your rent does not get easier. Your checking account does not suddenly look healthier. Your future does not send a thank you note. You just have $3 sitting somewhere else, looking small enough to be bullied by a vending machine. After 1 week, you have about $21. This is not a number that changes your life. This is not a number you tell someone at dinner unless you want the conversation to become extremely quiet. The other version of you spent the same $21 and also feels normal. Maybe there were coffees, maybe a snack, maybe one delivery fee that felt like the price of emotional survival. Both lives still look the same from the outside. After 1 month, you have about $90. Now the number has a little shape to it, but not enough to impress anyone. It is still less than a grocery trip that somehow involved 6 items and emotional damage. You look at the balance and think, that's it? And yes, that is it. The first month does not reward you. It tests whether you need applause to keep going. This is where the other version of you has an advantage. Spending $3 gives a small, immediate feeling. A coffee in your hand, a snack in your bag, a slightly easier moment. The invested $3 gives you nothing today except the quiet suspicion that you are becoming the kind of person who does boring things on purpose. That is a difficult trade. Present you gets a treat. Future you gets a receipt. But something starts to happen around the second month, not in the account. In you, you notice the little purchases more. You see the moment where $3 usually escapes. At the checkout, in the app, at the gas station, after work, when your brain says you deserve something because apparently surviving emails now requires dessert, you are not suddenly disciplined. You are just awake in places where you used to be unconscious. 3 months in, you have about $270 set aside before any growth. It still does not feel powerful, but it feels real. The other version of you also spent about $270. The difference is that their $270 has dissolved into small comforts they can barely remember. Yours is sitting there, unimpressive but visible. That visibility matters. Money that is visible can become a plan. Money that disappears becomes a mood. 6 months in, you have about $540. The number is still not dramatic, but it is harder to laugh at now. It could cover a bill. It could soften a small emergency. It could stop one bad week from becoming a credit card balance with a personality. You start to realize something uncomfortable. The $3 was never holding your life together. It was just disappearing quietly enough that you never questioned it. In the spending version, nothing terrible happens either. That is what makes it dangerous. You do not wake up 6 months later in financial disaster because you spent $3 a day. You just wake up exactly where you were. Same paycheck, same anxiety, same little feeling that money is always leaving through doors you did not know were open. Spending it all does not usually create a crisis. It creates no evidence that you were ever trying. 1 year in, you have set aside around $195. If it was invested and the market helped even a little, maybe it is more. If the market had a bad year, maybe it is less. Either way, the important thing is not the exact number. The important thing is that there is a number, a real one, built from money that used to vanish between coffee lids, delivery fees, and tiny decisions you swore did not count. The first year teaches you something the balance cannot show. Your life did not collapse without those $3. You still ate, you still had small pleasures, you still made imperfect choices because you are a person, not a spreadsheet with shoes. But you proved that a tiny amount could be redirected without your entire lifestyle filing a complaint. That proof is worth more than the balance because proof changes what you believe is possible. 2 years in, the habit starts feeling less like a project and more like background music. You do not negotiate with it every day. You do not hold a dramatic meeting with yourself beside the fridge. The money leaves before your excuses wake up. The other version of you is still saying, it's only $3 ours, and they are right every single time. That is the problem. It's only $3 becomes expensive because it is always technically true. Then life does what life does. A weird bill shows up. Your car needs something with a name that sounds fake and costs real money. Groceries get more expensive because apparently lettuce has entered its luxury era. For a moment you think about stopping the habit just for a week, just until things calm down. But things calming down is one of the greatest fictional stories in adult life. So you keep going, not because it is easy, but because stopping would be easier to repeat. The market drops at some point because the market has a gift for choosing the most emotionally inconvenient time to be dramatic. You open the app and the balance is lower than last month even though you kept contributing. This feels rude, you did the responsible thing, and the line went down. In the spending version, there is no line to watch, which is honestly peaceful in the way ignorance is peaceful until the bill arrives. You do not sell, you do not panic. You also do not feel like a wise investor standing on a mountain at sunrise. You feel annoyed in your kitchen. But the habit continues. The next $3 buys a little more because prices are lower. You do not fully appreciate this in the moment. Almost nobody does. Discipline rarely feels noble while you are doing it. Most of the time, it feels like continuing while mildly irritated. 5 years in, you have contributed around $5,175 before returns. With reasonable growth, the account may be larger, not mansion larger, not quit your job larger, but real enough to change the way you look at small money. The other version of you also moved more than $5,000 through life. Not in one dramatic mistake, not in one reckless weekend. It leaked through thousands of tiny permissions that felt harmless at the time. This is where the two lives begin to separate emotionally. The investing version of you is not rich. You still check prices. You still feel rent in your chest. You still look at your bank account after a weekend and briefly question every choice that led you here. But underneath that anxiety, there's a small structure, a habit, a balance, a quiet proof that you can build something even when life is expensive and your motivation is not always available. The spending version of you is not a villain. That matters. This version is tired, busy, human. They buy small comforts because small comforts are easier to access than long-term peace. They are not stupid for wanting the coffee, the snack, the convenience, the tiny upgrade that makes the day less annoying. But the problem is not one purchase. The problem is that every tiny purchase gets to disappear without being asked what it is building. 10 years in, the invested $3 a day has become a serious habit with a serious balance. You have contributed around $10,150 before returns. With time and growth, the account may be meaningfully higher. The exact number depends on the market because the market enjoys being both useful and emotionally unstable. But the habit no longer depends on excitement. It has survived boredom, bad months, good excuses, and several versions of you who did not feel like doing it. By now, the money has started to behave differently. At first, you were the only one contributing. Every dollar had to come from you. Now, the balance itself begins to help. Returns show up quietly, not guaranteed, not smooth, not obedient, but real enough to notice. The account starts feeling less like a jar and more like a machine. You still feed it small amounts, but time has started feeding it too. Time is the only partner who never asks how your week was. The strange part is how ordinary your life still looks. You're not walking around glowing with financial wisdom. You're still comparing grocery prices like a detective. You still wonder why every subscription thinks it deserves a permanent relationship with your card. You still make impulse purchases sometimes. But the difference is that you are no longer letting every small dollar escape into the fog. Some of it has a job now. 15 years in, the contrast becomes harder to ignore. The invested version has a growing account and a calmer relationship with small choices. The spending version may have had more little moments of comfort along the way, and some of them were worth it. This is not a story about never enjoying life. A life with no small pleasures is just a budget wearing a punishment costume. The question is not whether you spent money. The question is whether every small dollar had to disappear. 20 years in, the habit has become part of your identity. You have contributed around $21,900 before returns. With decades of growth, the balance may be many times larger than the money you personally put in. This is where compounding stops feeling like a finance word and starts feeling like someone else quietly working a second shift in your account. You are still contributing $3 a day, but the machine is no longer small. The other version of you also had 20 years of $3 decisions. That is the uncomfortable mirror. More than $21,000 passed through their hands in tiny amounts, and because it was always small, it rarely felt worth questioning. This is how money disappears without drama. Not through one villain purchase, through ordinary days, through convenience, through fatigue, through the sentence, "It's only $3, don't repeat it," until it becomes a lifestyle. Years later, the invested version of you does not look back and remember every deposit. Most of them were forgettable. That is the point. The best financial habits eventually become boring enough to survive your mood. You do not need to be inspired for 40 years. You just need a system that keeps going when inspiration is out buying snacks. Motivation is useful, but automation is less emotional and therefore less likely to betray you. At some point, the account becomes more than money. It becomes evidence. Evidence that small decisions count. Evidence that future you was not completely abandoned. Evidence that you can build without waiting for the perfect raise, the perfect month, or the magical future version of yourself who meal preps, reads tax law, and never wants takeout. You did not become perfect. You became consistent in one tiny place. That tiny place changes how you see everything else. You start noticing the gap between spending that creates a memory and spending that only fills a silence. You still buy things. You still enjoy life. But you become harder to trick. A small purchase has to explain itself now. Not because $3 is sacred, but because you finally understand that small money is where the future hides when the present is too busy to respect it. Near the far future, the numbers become almost strange. The invested $3 a day may have turned into a balance that feels impossible compared to the size of the original decision, not because $3 was magic, not because the market was a fairy tale, but because repetition gave time something to work with. Time does not need you to be rich. It needs you to stop waiting for the amount to feel impressive before you begin. And the version that spent it all? Maybe that version had more coffees, more snacks, more tiny upgrades, more moments that made the day softer. Some were probably worth it. But if every $3 became a moment and none became a foundation, then years later there's a question sitting quietly in the room. Not a judgment, just a question. Where did it go? And more importantly, did it become anything? You are back in line again, looking at the same kind of small decision, the upgrade, the snack, the fee, the little purchase that feels too small to matter. This time, you see it differently, not as a moral test, not as a command to never enjoy anything, just as a fork in the road so small most people step over it without noticing. One version of your life spends it and forgets it. Another version gives it a job. $3 will not save you today. $3 will not make you rich tomorrow. $3 is almost nothing once. But repeated long enough, almost nothing becomes the difference between wondering where your money went and knowing where your future began. And if you spend it all, I do not know. Tell me, is it working?